The shield wall has gone silent. No shouting yet. No clash of iron. Just breathing. Hundreds of men breathing together, waiting, watching the gap between the two armies grow smaller with every heartbeat. Somewhere in that line, a warrior lowers his head. His hands are shaking, and not from cold. His heart is a war drum inside his own chest. In a few moments, he will either kill or be killed, and his body already knows it. You have felt fear before, maybe before a job interview, a hard conversation, a moment you couldn't take back. But nothing you felt compares to this, the fear of a man standing in a shield wall, waiting for the order to advance. For most of Viking history, that fear wasn't something to hide, it was something to burn. Because before the fighting began, some warriors had a way of turning terror into something else entirely, a state so intense that men who witnessed it swore these fighters had stopped being men at all. This is how they did it. Fear was the first enemy every Viking warrior had to defeat, and it was not the kind of enemy a sword could touch. Battle in the Viking Age was not fought at a distance. It was fought face to face, shield against shield, close enough to smell another man's breath. Historians of combat psychology point out something uncomfortable about warfare before gunpowder. The greatest threat to an army was rarely the enemy's weapons. It was the body's own instinct to run. Most of the men standing in that shield wall were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, men who had picked up a spear because their lord called them to war, not because they were built for killing. Standing shoulder to shoulder, shield rim against shield rim, they could feel the man beside them breathing. That contact wasn't comfort. It was discipline, a wall of ordinary men held together against the oldest instinct a human body has, to flee. Holding still, though, was never going to win a battle. A wall that only stood and waited would eventually break. Somewhere in that silence, something had to change, a shift from fear to something the sagas would later describe as barely human at all. The line held, and then, one by one, it began to change. It began with sound. Somewhere along the line, a warrior threw back his head and howled, not a war cry aimed at the enemy, but something older, animal, aimed inward. Another beat the flat of his axe against his shield. Once, twice, a rhythm the men beside him picked up without being told. Voices dropped into growls. Bodies began to rock, shoulder to shoulder, in a motion that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with what was happening inside each man's chest. Combat historians studying the shield wall have noted that this collective noise served a real, practical purpose. A single frightened man is alone with his fear. 100 men roaring together are something else entirely. The sound itself seems to dissolve the individual into the group, making the wall feel less like a line of separate bodies and more like a single, furious organism. Then came the gesture that Norse sources return to again and again, a warrior biting down on the rim of his own shield. The Ynglinga saga, written by the Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, describes Odin's warriors going into battle without armor, howling like wolves, strong as bears, and biting their shields as they came. Other sagas, including Egil's saga, repeat the same detail. Historians can't say with full certainty what this gesture accomplished, whether it was pain used deliberately, a trigger the body responded to, or simply an outward sign that a man had already crossed into a different state of mind. What the sources agree on is that it worked as a signal. When a warrior bit his shield, the men beside him knew what was coming. This was not panic breaking loose. It was rhythm, chanting, biting, rocking, repeated until the whole line seemed to breathe, as one creature instead of many separate men, each one carrying his own private fear. That fear never disappeared. It was reshaped into something a body could actually use. By the time the first spear left a hand, some of these men were no longer entirely themselves. Among these warriors, one group went further than the rest, and their name has survived 1,000 years for a reason. The Norse called them berserkers. The word likely comes from bearshirt, warriors who fought wrapped in bearskin, said to carry the animal's strength into battle with them. Alongside them stood the úlfhéðnar, the wolf coats, warriors sworn to Odin, who wore wolf pelts instead. Both groups appear across the sagas as something more than skilled fighters. They appear as men who, in the eyes of everyone watching, had stopped being men at all. The Ynglinga saga describes Odin's chosen warriors as mad as dogs or wolves, strong as bears or wild oxen, killing with a single blow, and, the saga claims, untouched by fire or iron. In the Folsunga saga, two warriors put on enchanted wolfskins and are described as transforming into wolves outright. In Hrólfr saga, a warrior named Böðvar Bjarki fights in the form of a great bear, and the weapons of his enemies are said to glance off him harmlessly, as if his skin had turned to something other than flesh. We can't confirm any of this as literal fact. No archaeologist has ever found proof that a man became an animal on a Viking Age battlefield. What we can confirm is the belief itself, and how seriously it was held. To the warriors standing in that shield wall, and to the men across from them, this was not costume, and it was not performance. It was transformation. A berserker did not imagine he carried the bear's fury into the fight. As far as the sagas tell us, he believed the bear's fury now belonged to him. That belief may be the most dangerous weapon these men carried. An enemy facing a warrior who has stopped fearing pain and stopped fearing death is facing something the human mind has very few tools to fight. Historians of Viking religion, including archaeologist Neil Price, have described this as a genuine spiritual role, not a costume worn for effect, but a warrior identity bound up with belief in animal spirits and the favor of Odin himself. So what was actually happening inside these men? Historians have debated this for over a century, and no single answer has won. One old theory points to substances, specifically fly agaric, a hallucinogenic mushroom native to Scandinavia's forests. It's a dramatic idea, and it has shaped a lot of popular imagination about berserkers, but the evidence for it is thin. Archaeologist Neil Price, one of the leading modern scholars of Viking Age religion, has argued there's no solid proof berserkers used any drug at all. The theory, he suggests, rests more on speculation and later legend than on the actual historical sources. A second theory looks at biology instead of chemistry, self-induced trance. The howling, the rocking, the biting, the rhythm. Researchers, studying altered states of consciousness, note that repetitive physical rituals like these can genuinely shift a person's mental and physical state, without any substance involved at all. A third theory is less mystical and more social, group belief itself. A warrior raised from childhood to believe Odin could grant him a wolf's fury, standing shoulder to shoulder with others who believed exactly the same thing, may not have needed anything external to cross into that state. The ritual and the belief did the work together, each one reinforcing the other. What we do know is that the Norse themselves took berserksgangur seriously enough to fear it off the battlefield too. By the 13th century, Iceland's law code, the Gragas, banned the practice outright, a sign that this fury was never seen as harmless theater, but as something genuinely dangerous, even to the men who carried it. By now, the line no longer looked like the one that had stood in silence minutes before. The rhythm has taken over completely. Shields are being struck in unison. Somewhere, a warrior's howl has become continuous, no longer a sound a man chooses to make, but one that seems to be making itself. Eyes are wide, unfocused, fixed on something past the enemy line. The berserkers at the front no longer seem to notice the cold, or their own wounds, or the men trying to hold them back until the order comes. This is the state the sagas called berserksgangur, the fury fully arrived. Whatever combination of belief, ritual, and biology produced it, the effect described again and again is the same. A warrior who no longer calculates risk, who no longer bargains with fear, because fear itself has been replaced by something the sources struggle to name. The gap between the armies is closing. There is no more silence to fill, no more rhythm to build, only the moment the shield walls meet. And in that instant, the men who bit their shields, who wore the wolf's skin, who believed a god's fury now lived inside their own chest, step forward first. Modern fighters still chase a version of this state. Boxers pace before a bout, muttering to themselves. Fighters stepping into a cage often describe a moment where fear turns into something usable, not gone, but transformed into focus, into aggression they can actually direct. Sports psychologists have a name for that shift now. The Vikings didn't. They built rituals instead, and trusted the ritual to carry them across the line between terror and fury, again and again, battle after battle. That may be the real inheritance here, not the shield biting, not the wolfskins, but the understanding underneath them. Fear doesn't have to be defeated to be useful. It can be shaped, pointed somewhere, turned into fuel instead of paralysis. The line between discipline and chaos, it turns out, has always been thinner than we like to admit. If this changed how you picture the moments before a Viking battle, hit like and tell me in the comments, do you think you could turn fear into fury like this, or would it swallow you whole instead? And if you haven't seen it yet, these same warriors fought another battle with no weapons at all, against the Arctic cold itself. Watch How Did Vikings Survive the Arctic Cold next.